Right, gentlemen, so we have two big questions here. Two big questions to start with. Page 150, I think. Page 150. So Yaakov and Lavan, we had gotten to where Lavan pulls this switch, and on the top of page 152. Top of page 152. But this was when Yaakov says, "What'd you do to me?" Remember, that was the last thing we had done. That he says, well, we don't, in our place, we don't do that. Maybe where you come from, things like that happen, but in our place, we don't do that. Right? You remember we spoke about that. Lavan's answer to Yaakov. Remember that? Yes. Yeah. Somebody speak. Yeah, okay, you remember that, okay. So I heard from Rabbi Selengut from the center program. He told me this pasuk could also be read, Vayomer Lavan. Lo, put the word lo in quotation marks, and put the word Cain in quotation marks. Vayomer Lavan. Lo, the word lo, yeyasa Cain. It becomes yes, bim komenu, in our place. That means when I say no, it becomes yes in our place. Vayomer Lavan. Lo, yeyasa Cain, bim komenu. And therefore, I have the right, let's say sincerely, to give the younger one for it. Because in other words, we lie all the time, right? So you have no what do you call it? Okay, so then they names a price, and Yaakov has to work for another 7 years for Rachel. And in the meantime, now the question that the Ramban in pasuk Chavtes, Vayiten Lavan Rachel bito es bila shifcha zolala shifcha. Vayavo gam el Rachel, vayav gam es Rachel mi Leah, vayavo rima od sheva sharim achera. So Yaakov loves Rachel more than Leah. Now, one of the forces, the Chedush Harim, I believe, he says, vayav gam es Rachel mi Leah. He loves Rachel, literally translates to from Leah. And the Chedush Harim says, he loved her because of what she did for Leah. In other words, her nobility of character, which is what Yaakov was attracted to begin with, that when he sees what she could do for Leah, that's exactly why he loved Rachel. That selflessness, that she gives up her husband for her sister Leah, Yaakov es Rachel, mi Leah, because of what he did for Leah, what she did for Leah. That's what the Chedush Harim says. He sees in the pasuk. Now, there are two big questions over here. The first question is the Ramban. And the Ramban asks, when, there's something called a mekach ta'us. The Gemara in Kedushin says, a man says to a woman, marry me on condition that I'm a Kohen. And it turns out that he's a Levi. That's what do you call it? It's a mekach ta'us. It's mistaken circumstances. Man says to a woman, marry me on condition that I have $100,000 in the bank. And it turns out he doesn't. It's a mistaken circumstances. What's the halacha in such a circumstance? Divorce. You don't even need a divorce. By the letter, it's not a marriage. It was false circumstance. The condition wasn't met. I think there's a rabbinic. I think midirabanan, he has to give her a get so people don't think that couples split up without a divorce. But midoraisa is mistaken circumstances. It would call them mekach ta'us.
Can she then marry
she can marry anybody. Yeah, she's not a what do you call it? She's not a midrabanan, possibly not, because you got a reach. It's got a reach yet. But the what do you call it? But I think midrabanan, she has to get again. But midoraisa, it's not a marriage. It's not a marriage because you know what the nafkamina would be. Let's say she commits adultery. She commits adultery and has a child. The child's not a mamzer. Child's not a mamzer because she was never married. She's a single woman. She was never married. So the Kvarshim ask over here, Yaakov intends to marry Rachel. And instead it turns out to be Leah. So why isn't it a mekach ta'us? You can't get a bigger mekach ta'us than that. He ended up living with the wrong woman. Right? Yeah, he ended up living with the wrong woman. I mean, what they could have a bigger mekach ta'us than that. Why is it considered a marriage? They should void the marriage. Good question, right? What kind of marriage? Why does mamish a mekach ta'us? How come why does Yaakov just say, well, listen, here, take off? I mean, there's not, we're not married. I didn't intend to marry you. Well, how can it not be a mekach ta'us? Good question, isn't it? So I saw it was a good question. One of the Forshim says that Yaakov, suspecting that Lavan would try something like this, and he did everything he can to prevent it. He gave Rachel the simanim. And he gave everything, he did everything he can to prevent it. Yet, when he entered the marriage chamber, he had in mind, if this is Rachel, I want it to be a marriage with Rachel. And if it's Leah, I want it to be a marriage with Leah.
Why did he have that in his mind?
Because he suspected Dovid would try to pull, from the very beginning we see that he suspected Dovid was going to try to pull a sneak. So for example, Yaakov had intent in advance that in the, as I told you on the airplanes already announced, in the unlikely event of a water landing, right, which apparently isn't that unlikely, otherwise they wouldn't be talking about it, right? I told you, they never announce it on buses. In the unlikely event of going off a bridge with the bus, that they don't announce. On the airplane they're announcing. I don't know why are you talking about this if it's so unlikely. So in the unlikely event of a water landing, in the unlikely event of that's just what we're all going to do. Yeah, everybody, they just pull down and breathe. Sure. Yeah, you're going to have panic like nobody's business. They always ask you if you're sitting by the seat, by the good seat by the door. Will you be able to help out if there's an emergency? Yeah. How do you know? You never been there before. How do you know? Yeah, I want the good seat. How do you know you can do it? Why? Have you got a lot of experience of sitting by emergency doors? And what are you going to do if the guy just heads out first? Says, get me the heck out of here. What are you going to do? You're going to sue the guy because he gave him the best of the cheap seats? So what do you call So one approach is that Yaakov, suspecting it, it's a very good lumdish, it's a nice lumdish answer, suspecting that he is going to try to pull a switch, Yaakov already has in mind in advance that even if it doesn't work out, even if it's not Leah, if it's not Rachel, it's Leah, then I want that my marriage should be with Leah. That's the answer they get. What bothers you about that, Itamar?
Why would he say that if it's Leah, I'll go through it anyways? Why not give him the opportunity to divorce her if it is Leah?
He wasn't going to divorce. Why he doesn't divorce, but we're not asking about why he didn't divorce. We're asking why is it considered a valid marriage to begin with? Why is it a valid marriage to begin with? Because that was his intent when he made the Kedushin. His intent was, if it's not this one, it'll be this one, and that's the one that I'm marrying. Why he doesn't divorce her is because Yaakov himself, it's a good question. What Rav Victor Miller says is that Yaakov himself is a man of faith. And he understands that if this is what happened, then it's all from Hashem. I did all my hishtadlus. You did everything humanly possible to avoid this. And it still happened. So Yaakov, at his level, understands that this is the Ratzon Hashem, and even more than that. As a result of this, then he marries Rachel, and Yosef is born, and the brothers are jealous of Yosef, and because they're jealous of Yosef, he gets sold to Egypt, and that brings the Bnei Yisrael into Egypt. The entire plan then takes place as a result of Leah being taken first. The entire history unravels as a result, and even more than that. I'll get to you in 1 second. There's a consistent theme that we find here in the Torah, which is that the guy who's down and out ends up winning. Here's Leah, the rejected sister, and yet she's the one who comes from Leah, Shevet Yehuda. Where do we come from? We're called the Yehudim. All the other rest of the tribes went lost. Most Jews today are from Shevet Yehuda. That comes from Leah. Most Jews, I'm not. I'm from Levi. I'm a Kohen, so I'm from Shevet Levi. It's from Leah, though. And the rest of you are from Yehuda. None of you are Levium?
I am Levi.
You're a Levi. You can wash my hands if you're good. Any Kohanim? Nobody's a Kohen, huh? Right? So what do you call it? Everybody's come from Leah. Who was Leah? Leah's the one who wasn't even going to marry him. You see that the underdog in Torah, here's Moshe Rabbeinu was going to be destroyed. Moshe Rabbeinu was put in a basket on the Nile. Mm-hmm. Remember, we spoke about that. What are the chances of survival in the Nile? What are the chances of mother puts a woman and a baby in a basket in the Nile? You know what could happen in the Nile? The wind could blow, and it could there are crocodiles in the Nile, right? They're crocodiles. Crocodiles are tougher than alligators. I told you, an alligator has the jaw is like a human being jaw, right? An alligator, the guys, I told you, guys, the alligator wrestle. You know what the trick is? Get your hand over the snout, because you can hold the alligator's snout closed under 30 pounds of pressure. So it looks tough. It's not a big deal. If If you had an alligator, I would show you right now. It's just not a big deal, right? You've done it? You've alligator wrestled?
No, I've seen it before.
Oh, you've seen it, yeah. From a yeah, it's not that tough, right? Yeah, there's a guy walking around without a hand, but it's not that tough, So the way to go. So crocodiles are impossible. Crocodiles, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, they're quicker, and so the crocodiles. You know what else is in the Nile? They're hippopotami. And Josephus writes, hippopotami, I told you statistically, there are more people killed on continental Africa by hippopotami than by all other wildlife put together. How do you like that? More people, you didn't, yeah, I know, because you're thinking hippopotamus, he looks like he's smiling, right? And he reminds you of your Uncle Marv, right? He's bald and he's smiling, and all he needs is a cigar, and he's your Uncle Marv. But it's not quite like that. They've got the widest jaw span of any mammal. They got the widest jaw span. They could outrun a lot. They're much faster than they look. They're like football linemen. These guys are much faster than they look. They could jump. They're the most dangerous. They're considered the most dangerous creature. And what's his name? Josephus writes, in one of the Roman wars, he writes that there were more soldiers were killed by the hippopotami than even by the enemy. Josephus writes that. They're vicious. So what are the chances of putting Moshe Rabbeinu in a thing? And he grows up, and he runs off to Midian. This is the guy. What are the chances? You see that the underdog. Yosef is sold by the brothers, goes off into slavery, is in prison for 12 years. The whole, what do you call it? What 10 years in prison? 12 years. How long was Yosef in prison for? 12 years in prison, right? 12 years in prison. What are the chances? And in the end, he becomes the king. He becomes leader. This is a theme you find in Torah constantly. Avram Avinu is thrown into a furnace, and he's destitute and everything else. His wife is taken. It's a theme that you find constantly in Torah where there's a reason. It's not just that we should what do you call it? That it should be a Kurt Warner movie. Oh wow, the Kurt Warner movie and a Kurt Warner story was the biggest underdog story in history in sports. That's not what the Torah is trying to teach you, that you should never give up in life. No matter what the odds are against us, no matter how the chips are down on an individual level and on a national level. Klal Yisrael's not in great shape right now. We're not in great situation right now. People think, we're in Israel. Yeah, so what? So the Americans are still dictating policy for us. Right? So we're in Israel. We're not. We're still in Golus. We're very much in Golus. I told you Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said that the golden dome over here, 20 minutes away, the golden dome is not such a bad thing. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky said that. What did Gedolei do? How do you like that? You know why? It's a reminder we're in Golus. That's why. So don't get too cheeky. Right? The big shots, the big Israelis flexing their muscles against the Americans and then folding like a hand in poker. Right? That's how quickly they fold. Because the Americans dictate policy. Do you think Israelis have any, what do you call it? The guy came to Rav Elyashiv Zatzal when they were doing the pullout from Gaza. So they sent the head of the military, what's his name, Shaul Mofaz. Ariel Sharon, when they did the withdrawal from Gaza, so he wanted to get he didn't want opposition. And people of the country was opposed to withdrawal. So he tried to get as many people on board as possible. So he figured he'll get the Haredim behind him also. Not the Haredim don't have any say in anything, but he doesn't want them opposing him. So he sends Shaul Mofaz to Rav Elyashiv to ask Rav Elyashiv his opinion, because he knows that if Rav Elyashiv says a good idea, so all the Haredim will say it's a good idea. So he sends Shaul Mofaz. I could just see the conversation in that room between him and Mofaz. He said, I can see Mofaz saying, yeah, let me handle. I'll take care of the old guy over there. Don't worry. I'll work behind. So he goes to Rabbi Yashiv. He says, and he pretends to be respectful. He goes, what should we? How much should we take the American opinion into consideration? So Yashiv says to him, I don't understand the question. Everything you do is because the Americans tell you what to do. And he walks out. He walks out in shame. He thought he was gonna run circles around Rabbi Elyashiv. He thought like that. That was when Ben Gurion met the Chazon Ish. Very famous. You know Ben Gurion met the Chazon Ish. Ben Gurion's trying to get a country going. And every time he wants cooperation with the religious, they keep saying, well, the Chazon Ish said this. He said, what's the Chazon Ish? Who's the Chazon Ish? A frail little old man in Bnei Brak. in living in a hovel in Bnei Brak, and every time Ben Gurion is trying to get something done with the frum, so they keep talking about the Chazon Ish. So Ben Gurion says he wants to. He contacts the Chazon Ish. He sends somebody because could Ben Gurion come and see you? So Chazon Ish says my door is open to everyone. So Ben Gurion comes to the Chazon Ish. So he says, why are we having so much conflict? So Chazon Ish says, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, I think it's Daf Chav Vav in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, what happens when you have two animals going up a hill, and they both got to pass on a narrow passage, or two ships that are sailing, and there's only room for one of them. Now somebody's going to have to move. So who's supposed to move? So the Gemara says, the one that's empty has to step aside for the one that's full. He has to move aside so the one that's full could pass. So he says, you're empty. We're full for 2,000 years. We've got 2,000 years. You guys have to step aside for us. That's what he said to Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was very frustrated, and he just, we're not empty. We're not empty. We're not empty. But that was, so he thought, Ben Gurion thought, Ben Gurion prided himself on being very smart. And Ben Gurion figured, I'll go to the Chazon Ish and I'll work this little old European Jew around my finger. And the Chazon Ish says something, and Ben Gurion loses a couple of nights' sleep. He can't, what do you call it? So that's what. So the Torah is teaching you the underdog. We should never give up. Never give up. On an individual level, sometimes the chips are down, and a person doesn't see his way out, and we have no idea how we're going to get out of this. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings a Yeshua from places that a person can't imagine. And Klal Yisrael has been in situations where there was a Holocaust, and next thing you know, they're living in Eretz Yisrael. Who would have bet on that? Who would have bet on that without going into Zionism and whether the states are going? But who would have bet that all of a sudden you're going to get a presence? All of a sudden you had a Holocaust, where Jews are getting decimated. Now we got more Jews in Israel since the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. So who would have what do you call it? Bli netter. Who would have possibly thought of such a thing? So you understand, sometimes the chips are down. I told you there's an apocryphal story I once heard from Rabbi Twersky. He said like this: there's a Jew comes to a rabbi, and he says to this Rabbi, I have a problem. I have a faith crisis. So what's the problem? He says, listen, I'm phenomenally rich. I have 3 sons who are phenomenally rich. I should have such problems. I have 3 sons who are phenomenally rich. I have 3 son-in-laws who are phenomenally rich. Barring a global apocalypse, I don't see any way that God could make me poor. If I lose my money, my sons will take care of me. If my sons lose it, my son-in-laws will take care of me. I don't see any way that God could make me poor. And frankly, maybe if there'd be a nuclear war. But other than a global apocalypse, I don't see it. So Rabbi says, you shouldn't talk like that. He says, no, what can I tell you? I don't see anyway. He says, okay, well, don't say, I'm warning you, right? You have to have faith. God could do anything. He says, I just don't believe it. He walks out of the rabbi's office, and he suddenly gets this overwhelming urge to convert to Christianity. He's never felt this way before. And all of a sudden, he just got this crazy urge. He wants to convert to Christianity. So what happened? He goes and knocks on the local church. Right? So the priest opens up the door. There's a Jew with a shtreimel and pay is standing in front of him. He says, what do you want? He says, I want to embrace your religion. I want to convert. He says, come on. Don't drain me a cup. What do you want? He says, no, I'm telling you, I want to embrace your religion. He says, listen, the only way you're going to embrace my religion, I prove you're sincere. You have to sign a paper that you're signing over all your possessions to the church. Right? He says, okay, give me the paper. So he takes the paper. He signs over, I, Yankel Schwartz, sign over all my possessions to the church. He gives it to the priest. He says, okay. Puts it in the drawer. He says, come back tomorrow at 12 o'clock. We'll baptize you. He walks out, goes into the street, and as soon as he hits the street, the urge to convert leaves him. He thinks, what did I just do? I have no money because I just signed it over to the church. My sons aren't going to give me a dime. They're going to sit Shiva over me. My son-in-laws are going to disown me. I'm destitutely poor. He heads back to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, I have a faith crisis. He says, yeah. He says, I'm destitutely poor. I don't see any way that God would get me out of this. He says, haven't we been through this once before today? He says, yeah, but Rabbi, I'm really in trouble now. What am I going to do? So the rabbi says, do you believe it? Oh, I believe. Oh, yeah, I believe. So in the middle of talking, I don't say, here's a fire engine. There's a fire in the church. There's no more paper, no more priest, no more church. The whole thing's over. Right? Apocryphal story. It's an apocryphal story. that means that there are situations in life where we're clueless. We have no idea where could this come from. There was a couple in Switzerland. There's a couple in Switzerland, a Kolel couple with 13 kids, I told you, and they get a knock on the door. The wealthiest non-Jew in Switzerland, in Basel, Switzerland. And I know the story is true because some girl in a seminary came over to me afterwards. She said she knows the family. The family, a couple with, I think, 13 kids. They have no money. He's learning in Kolel. The wealthiest Jew in Basel, a wealthy non-Jew in Basel, died. He had no heirs. He left his entire estate and entire holdings to the family with the most children in Basel. Whoa. Yeah, well, how many kids do you think your average non-Jew in Basel had? 1.3, a dog and a Swiss chocolate bar, And here's this guy with 13 kids. The next thing you know, he's got, and that's a true story. A true story. Again, all the stories I tell you are true. All the stories, some just haven't happened yet. All the stories I tell you are true. True means that I either heard them or read them. But this one is a confirmed true story. There's another story about a Jew. There's a guy in Kolol this Thursday night. They had no money in the house. No money in the house. And his wife is upset because she's asking for money. She needs to make Shabbos. He doesn't have money. And she starts to cry, and he feels bad that she feels bad. Now he's going to, and then she doesn't know if she feels bad because now he's going to have to work and he can't learn. And she's just, everybody's upset. And all of a sudden they hear shattering glass in the back room. So they run to the back room. A burglar breaks into the house, and he pulls out a gun. He says, "Get on your stomachs, don't you dare move." The guy's lying there. He says, "Listen, if you're looking for money, you're in the wrong place." He says, "I'll decide. You sit there and don't you dare move." He goes around the house, doesn't see anything, starts climbing out the window. As he's heading out the window, he says, "Hey, buddy, you need this more than I do." And he throws him a wad of cash and he heads out the window. Wow. Now, as far as making hishtadlus, that doesn't work. You can't say, "Well, what do you do for a living?" We leave the back window open. That's not a responsible form. It's not a responsible form of hishtadlus. But at the end of the day, people have Yeshuas. People have Yeshuas that nobody could imagine. People have Yeshuas that nobody could possibly imagine. And that's what the Torah teaches you with Leah. Leah, the chips were down. And Leah ends up becoming the mother of Klal Yisrael. She ends up becoming the mother of Klal Yisrael. Kohanim and Yehudim. We're called Yehudim because we come from Leah. That's why we're called Yehudim, for we come from Yehuda. Everybody's called a Yehudi. That's why we come. That's what Rav Victor Miller says is the underwriting theme over here. Now there's another halachic question, which the Ramban asks. Let's go on for a second. Leah starts having children. And one of the reasons she starts having children, if you'll notice, where it says in Pasuk Lamed Aleph, 7 lines from the top, Vayar Hashem ki snua Leah. Hashem sees that Leah is hated. Literally, snua means hated. Vayiftach es rachma, he opens her womb. V'rochel akora. Rachel is barren. So a womb is called a rechem. A rechem is a womb. The baby is 9 months. Baby is he's there. He gets free womb and board, right, for 9 months. So it's called the word rechem. The word rechem is a womb, and if you rearrange the letters of the word, I heard this from Rabbi Tatz. If you rearrange the first of all, it comes from the word rachem, which is mercy, but also rearrange it means machar. Machar means the future. Now the future comes out of the womb. The baby comes out of the womb. Machar, it's the future, tomorrow. So it says that Hashem opened her womb because she was snua. Now what that tells you is that she was also meant to be, she was essentially barren. She could not have children. Leah couldn't have children. Yet Hashem opens her womb. It doesn't normally would be that a woman would just give birth. Vayiftach Hashem es rachma is always an expression associated with a woman who couldn't have children and needed some sort of extra divine intervention, as opposed to letting the natural course of her just having children. Now, we explained why it is that she's merited this, whereas Rachel didn't, and Sarah didn't, and Rivka didn't. They had a daven. Because Leah is already daven. She's whatever they would accomplish by davening to have children, she's already accomplished by davening to avoid being married to Esav. So Hashem opens her womb, number one. Number two, don't you think it's strange that the Torah says, Vayar Hashem ki snua Leah? Do you remember what we said? Turn back to the beginning of Parshas Noach for a second. Keep your finger on the place. Keep your finger on the place. Go back to right the beginning of Parshas Noach. The first page of Parshas Noach, page 30. Remember, it says that in Pasuk, the third line on page 30, it says, "Vatishaches haaretz liftei Elokim," the land became corrupted. "Vatim alei haaretz chamas," Vayar Elokim es ha'aretz v'nei nishchasa. God saw that the land became corrupted, which answers the question of why the world has to be destroyed. Because only Hashem saw the corruption. Vayar Elokim. That means that people became so desensitized to what was happening, they don't realize they're doing anything wrong. At that point, you can't hope they're going to do tshuva. You can only do tshuva if you realize you're doing something wrong. If you have a world full of rampant immorality and perversion, and nobody sees it except God, Vayar Elokim es ha'aretz v'nei nishchasa. People were so desensitized to what, they don't even realize they're doing anything wrong. A drug addict doesn't know that he's got a problem. And he's just doing his drugs. Certainly when he is drug induced, he doesn't know he's got a problem. He thinks he's got a solution. So the entire world is drug addicted at this point. The world is drug addicted with immorality. They don't even know it's wrong. At that point, they can't do how are they going to do tshuva? You can only do tshuva if you realize you've done something wrong. And therefore, Vayar Elokim es ha'aretz v'nei nishchasa. So what does it say over here? Vayar Hashem kisnu Leah. Only Hashem saw it. You know what that means? That means that Leah herself didn't know it. Leah doesn't realize, other than one of the fortunes says she had a prophecy that he liked her less. It was only through prophecy, not through his behavior. Not through his behavior. Yaakov Avinu treated his wife, he kept all halachas. So he kept the halachas with his wife as well. You have to love, the Gemara says you have to oava kaguf, you love her as much as yourself, and you have to honor her more than yourself. You ever hear that? Oava kagufo umechabda yoser migufo. How do you like that, gentlemen? Think about that. And by the way, you know what that means? There are different meanings. One is that you have to spend more on her than you could afford. You say that again, loud. Wow. That's right. And it's more painful than you think, right? And that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that a man has to spend less on himself and more on his wife than he could afford. Why? Because she and the children do. They are dependent on you, and you're dependent on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which means that Gemara, my understanding, Gemara is telling you cause and effect. If you allow them to be dependent on you, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will allow you to be dependent on him. Wow. Right? Don't forget, big shot, where you're getting your money from. And if you allow them, you take care of them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take care of you. But just realize, the way they're looking at you is the way you're supposed to be looking at HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hey, we need something. And you're the one in control. So that's one shot. The other shot is, you love her as much as yourself, and you honor her more than yourself. You respect, not honor, respect her more than yourself. Honor and respect are different things. So the obvious question, why the discrepancy in the terminology? Either it should be you love her as much as yourself and you respect her as much, or you love her more than yourself and you respect her more than yourself. So why is there a discrepancy in the Gemara when it says, so the basic explanation is that when it comes to love, taking care of a person's physical, material needs, we all love ourselves. And we all take care of ourselves very well. If you take care of your wife's physical, material needs as well as you take care of your own, you're doing very well. But when it comes to the emotional needs, the respect, you can't treat a woman the way you treat a man. You have to deal with a woman, you have to pay attention to a woman, not interrupt her when she's speaking. There's a whole list of things, which I wouldn't demand it. I don't care if I say something that says, you're crazy. If we're talking about something, I say, well, I think Croatia's going to win the World Cup. So I say, you're crazy, right? You can't say that to your wife. The fact that she's willing to talk about the World Cup is good. But listen, in the '90s when the Bulls were winning championships, I made my wife memorize the starting team on the Chicago Bulls. That much I didn't know. Yeah, because she's got to know priorities in life, and she to this day she can probably tell you 3 out of 5, right? She was good, and she knew there was no getting away from it. That's the way, and she knows never to bring anything that says White Sox on it. Never comes in the house. She knows. Listen, there are priorities in life. When my first son was 1 year old, so my uncle, sent us a Los Angeles Dodgers jacket for a 1-year-old. That thing must have cost about $60, a little Dodgers jacket. So I said to my wife, he can't wear it. He can't wear it. It's a Dodgers jacket. He's not wearing it. She said, don't be ridiculous. It's a good piece of money. I said, okay, but just realize if it's White Sox, we burn it. She said, okay. She said, okay, White Sox we burn. That way that she understood. That much she was willing to concede. So Leah, Yaakov kept all the halachas. If he kept all the halachas, he loved her, he respected her, he honored her, he did everything he had to do because he kept all the halachas. And therefore, it's only the subtle, it was so subtle, there's one approach. There's another approach that Leah herself sensed the subtlety. But I want to tell you something, and this you should write down, gentlemen. A woman, it's a very strong term. You think Yaakov was guilty of hatred? How can Yaakov be guilty of hatred? Yaakov's sin is chinam for no reason, to hate somebody for no reason? Why what kind of business? So it says, Vayarashem kisnua Leah, that means a woman, a wife, who doesn't feel fully loved by her husband, she feels she's hated. It's a very extreme relationship. It's a very extreme relationship. And a woman, her whole life is her husband. Her whole life is centered around her husband. Everything she does is for her husband. Even when Leah's having children, look what she does. She goes, Vatahar Leah vateled ben vatikashma Ruvain. Ki amra kira Hashem bani ki atoyevan. Now my husband will love me. Vatahar od vateled vatamar ki shema Hashem ki sto anochi veitel li gamez vatikashma Shimon. He heard that I'm hated. Again, the husband. My husband will come draw near to me. All about the husband. Al-Kain Koresh Levi, you named Levi. So a woman is focused on the husband. The husband doesn't, if she feels that he doesn't love her. By the way, I'll tell you another thing. This is not a joke, by the way. There's no joke. If you're ever upset about anything, when you come into the house, if you're upset, the wife's first concern is you're upset with her. Her first concern. You come in and you're upset, it's not a joke. It's not a joke. You could have a miserable day at the office, the stock market is down, you're caught in traffic, you got 3 tickets, you walk into the house like an angry grizzly bear, and you're just like, boy, what a lousy day. Is something I did? No, just that we lost all our money on the market. And you go, oh, that's fine then, have some soup. As long as it's not, that's her word. That's her world. Her world is her husband. Her world is her husband. So it's a very, very subtle, There's a second question here. And the Ramban's asked this question. Yaakov, we've said many times, the Avos kept the entire Torah, right? They always kept the Torah. So how could Yaakov marry 2 sisters? How could Yaakov marry 2 sisters? And not only that, you heard a question. The Torah says you can't marry 2 sisters. You could marry a second sister when the first sister has died. But if you divorced Leah, Rachel, you can't marry Leah. If you divorced Leah, you can't marry Rachel. If one of them dies, you can marry the sister, surviving sister. And by the way, in Jewish history, it happened a lot. Rabbi Kiva Eger's first wife was Nifri, he married her sister. And one of the reasons it happened is because before the advent of antibiotics, where women got infections often in childbirth and they died in childbirth, well, who's dying in childbirth? Usually young women, which means that there may be young children in the house. Now, who's the next best person to raise those children? There's probably the one that's most similar to mommy, is probably her sister. So it was very common. We even had in our neighborhood, about 15, 20 years ago, a woman was sick. Her sister came into the house to help out with the kids. The woman was nifter. Then 6 months later, the husband married the sister. That happens all the time. I knew a couple from Chicago, an older couple. They'd been living, the wife and husband were married. There was a sister who was living with them for probably 50 years, 40, 50 years. We're talking about a very old couple. They moved to Israel, and the other sister had never gotten married. They moved to Israel, and the wife was nifter. So now they had a problem because they're all living in the same house, but now the husband and the sister-in-law are in the house as a problem yichud, and yichud has no statute of limitations. No age limit on. So they didn't know what to do. So the Rav suggested to get married. And they did. They did. And why not? That works. Right? So to marry a sister, you cannot marry one sister while the other sister is alive. So the Ramban says, so how could Yaakov Avinu have done it? How could Yaakov Avinu? What's that?
Because they made a yur, both of them. That was one explanation.
That what?
They made conversion.
They made a gear, they made conversion, so they're not officially, that could be one answer. The Ramban says good. The Ramban says, because by the letter of the law, when somebody converts, they're no longer related to their relatives. So by the letter of the law, when somebody converts, he can marry his mother. By the letter of the law. because they're no longer related. They don't, and I think there's a rabbinic prohibition of sorts, but by the letter of the law. So you have two sisters over here, no longer sisters, because it's as if they've been born from scratch, number one. But the Ramban's answer is that they didn't keep the Torah. They only started keeping the Torah in Eretz Yisrael. In Chutz La'aretz, when he married the two sisters, they weren't keeping, that's what the Ramban says. That's the Ramban. I'm telling you what the Ramban says. And then when they first come into Eretz Yisrael, that's why she dies. When they're on their way into Eretz Yisrael, that's why Rachel dies. But one second, I want to get to a different point, just to sum this up, then we'll finish. When Rachel doesn't have children, so then Rachel is jealous, and look what she says to Yaakov. Bottom of page 152. We'll finish up with this. Vateri Rachel ki lo yolda liYaakov vatakane Rachel ba'achosa. She's envious of her sister. Vatomer el Yaakov hava li banim. Give me children. V'im ayin mesa onochi. Otherwise I'll die. Or I'm like dead. How does he translate? Otherwise I am dead. So one of the commentaries says a really sharp. I think it's Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, who's one of the geniuses of the 16th century. He says like this: why does the Torah say you're not allowed to marry sisters? Why can't you marry sisters? Because there's a natural bond between sisters. And when a man marries two sisters, so now they're both competing for the husband, you create enmity between the two sisters, where there should be a natural bond. That's why if one of them dies, you can marry the other one. She's no longer alive, but she's divorced, because then that's going to cause resentment. So what happens? Rachel sees she hasn't gotten married, she doesn't have children. Vatekane Rachel ba'achosa, she's jealous. Oh, that's a problem. If we're both married and I'm not jealous of her, so then, okay, there's no problem of enmity. But now I'm becoming jealous. There are only one of two choices. Either I need children, so I won't be jealous, or I'm going to have to die, because we can't stay in this situation. We can't be in a situation where you're married to two sisters and there's a clash between us. That's what Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says. Very clever idea. So Rachel is saying, the plain meaning is that Rachel is saying to Yaakov, hey, you're going to have to daven, I need children. And if I don't have children, then I feel that I'm as good as dead. Now, not because of the normal, there is the normal biological desire a woman has, that normal mothering instinct that a woman has, she wants to have children. But even at a deeper level, Rachel is saying, my whole purpose is to be one of the building blocks of Klal Yisrael. My purpose of existence is to be a mother, to have children who are going to build the Jewish nation. And if not, what purpose is life? If I can't contribute, what purpose is life?
Idea that they were creating the Jewish people.
They had either a prophecy, a clear prophecy. We see later on that, but we see the Gemara says Leah knew that they were supposed to have 12 tribes. So there was some sort of sense that either at a clear prophetic level, at a subconscious prophetic level. Yeah, this is all they were talking about.
That they were doing something greater than.
Further, yes. That's clear. Okay, gentlemen, we'll continue tomorrow morning session.